Opening here, Bodhgaya, land of the Buddha. As Kristen mentioned, I've been to India a number of times, probably 6 or 8 of those times I've been to Bodhgaya. It's a place that many, many international travelers come to, whether they are Buddhists and they're on a pilgrimage, or they're just travelers and they're curious about the diverse cultures of the world. Many, many people want to go to Bihar Province and go to the holy sites, which draw Buddhists from all over the world. So that was actually what drew me there. I went on a study abroad program and we participated in a Buddhist meditation retreat, and we visited a lot of holy sites, and we did some service programs at local schools. And when I was there, I ended up making some really deep connections with some of the people that were running the schools. And honestly, it changed both my life and theirs. So what I'm going to tell you about today is a little bit about what you would see if you were to go to North India, to Bihar, some of the sacred sites, some of the type of opportunities you might be able to have if you ever chose to visit there. But I also want to give you some background about what are some of the challenges that are faced by people in Bihar. Bihar is the poorest province in India by many measures, and it causes a lot of problems, particularly for children there. So we're going to talk about that, and also a little bit more about how have things been extra difficult in the last couple of years due to the pandemic. And then, as Kristen said, I did end up starting a nonprofit with 2 schools, and I'll give you some more background about what it's like for the kids in those schools. What are the kind of things that are happening in those schools, and what are the projects we're dreaming of for those kids in the future? So it's kind of a broad span to cover in 25 minutes. But when I was thinking about how to share this information with you, I really didn't want to just give you the tourist version. And I also didn't want to just give you the, hey, look at my nonprofit and see how you can help kids. So I hope this works to give you both sort of an education and also a little bit of a glimpse of the diversity that is Bihar. So as I said initially, Bihar is the location of the place where Buddhism was founded. It's known as a Buddhist pilgrimage site. I'll say a little bit more about that when we get to some of the specific sites, but it is true that the huge majority of people who travel to Bihar come because of the Buddhist roots. Now, in this particular photograph on the left, you'll see one of the 2 schools that Be Change helps support, which is called Prema. This is a banyan tree, as you know from the quiz that we just had, the national tree of India. This is located very close to the school here. And also, these are photographs that include some of the other people who came with me on some of the service learning programs I've done in the last 5 years. Up until 5 years ago, I always did study abroad programs with youth, either high school students or gap year students between high school and college. But in the last 5 years, I've started to lead programs for adults where teenagers are also welcome. So like, as you can see on this particular program, I had 2 mother-daughter pairs. This was me with my mother, and a high school colleague of mine with her daughter, who at the time was 14. So I welcome people of all ages to travel abroad with me. And for the next 25 minutes, I look forward to showing these places that I know and love to all of you. So as I said, people come to Bihar from all over the world for the Buddhist holy sites. This is probably the single most important one. This is called the Mahabodhi Temple. Bodhi means enlightenment. And this is built at the site that is believed to be the location where the Buddha was enlightened. So the Buddha was born in a region that is actually on the side of the border, which would now be called Nepal. In those days, it was a kingdom. The country boundaries weren't quite as firm as they are now. But at this point, the Buddha was born in what was Nepal, but later in life, wandered to India, meditated and tried various practices for 6 years, finally reached a point after going through many of extremes of both indulgence, living in palaces, and extreme asceticism, starving himself and practicing very austere yogic practices. He reached a balance. He reached what he ended up calling the middle way. And when he reached that moment of enlightenment and realized we need to not go through extremes in life, but find a balance, that's considered the moment of enlightenment. And it is commemorated by this temple, which is called the Mahabodhi Temple. And these are pilgrims from Sri Lanka who always come dressed in white. This is a Tibetan monastery, which is not too far away from the Mahabodhi Temple. But what you'll see when you come to this region, in addition to the temple itself, so here's the Mahabodhi Temple, you will actually see not the direct tree that the Buddha was enlightened under, but what they call the granddaughter tree. Basically, the original tree that the Buddha was enlightened under, that happened about 2,600 years ago, and that tree is no longer alive. But that original tree was so sacred that, like now, where there's a gate protecting the granddaughter tree, there was a gate protecting the original tree as well. And the tree grew for hundreds and hundreds of years, and people took little cuttings of it and planted them all over the world at their Buddhist temples and retreat centers. And then when the original tree died, people went out and said, we want to have this branch, we want to have some trace of this original sacred tree to bring back to the original holy site. So they brought back the branch from the daughter trees, planted it back at the original site where the Buddha was enlightened, and it took root and grew again. And now this tree is revered as much as if it were the original tree where the Buddha was enlightened. And many people still come here. Not as many in the last couple of years with the pandemic. Things were shut down almost entirely for about a year and a half. But these pictures are from like 2014 to 2018. And anytime that you would come to Bodhgaya when there isn't a pandemic, you would see lots of people there, people that are meditating. These are Thai or Southeast Asian monks, Theravada monks from that Buddhist tradition. Over here you see Tibetan monks from the Tibetan tradition. And one of the things people do in the Tibetan tradition is what's called prostrations, where they will touch their hands to their forehead and they'll think, my body, speech, and mind, I am donating, or I am prostrating before the Buddha. And they'll do that maybe 1,000 times or 500 times, especially when they're in a sacred place. So if you go to Bodhgaya, you will see many, many people doing prostrations as a way of sort of humbling themselves before this very sacred location. So these are just a few more pictures of the grounds. And as you can see, lots of people are dressed in white. Many of the pilgrims, people who have come as pilgrims, will dress in white when they come on pilgrimage. Lots of carvings, and this is a very, very old and sacred site. One of the things that's really special, in addition to the Mahabodhi Temple, when you're looking at the history of Buddhism in Bihar and in Bodhgaya particularly, is that people from all these different traditions throughout Asia come to this very most sacred site of Buddhism, and they want to be able to pray in the temple that is in their own tradition. So there are many, over a dozen different temples from different traditions. So if you look here to the left, you can see the granddaughter tree. If you look here, you see a Tibetan stupa, which is in the Tibetan style. Here you see a Thai temple, which is in the Thai style. Over here, I believe this one was from Bhutan. I'm pretty sure that is Bhutan. This one is from inside of the Tibetan temple. But as you can see, just from looking at the external structures of the buildings, each of them is different. And if you go inside of these, for example, you go inside the Zen temple, they may be playing a very large drum while people are meditating. You go into another and they're playing chimes, or people are chanting in a whole variety of different Asian languages. So it's really very contemplative and culturally very, very interesting and very diverse. So while Buddhism is what draws the huge majority of tourists to Bodhgaya, and I have to say, from having brought a number of students to Bodhgaya and having brought now probably 15 or so adults to Bodhgaya, they like to see the Buddhist sites. They find them very special, very sacred, very meaningful. At the same time, most of the travelers that I have brought to India, their favorite part of the experience is getting to know the local people. And the way that I have done that in the programs that I facilitate is I bring people to schools. And while we're at the schools, we interact with the kids, we interact with the teachers. We often end up being invited to the homes of the principal or the teacher, or even sometimes some of the classroom parents. And it's a really meaningful way for us to connect with local people. So one of the things that I'm going to point out in this photograph before we go on to some of the others is just that these pictures are from a school called Prema Orphans Trust. And this was the first school that I encountered when I came to Bihar. I actually brought a group of students there in 2009 for the first time I visited the school. And at that time, the school had a single room, the room that you can see in this photograph where the children are sitting on the platform. And there was a single room. There was no electricity. The windows were open, not glassed, and they had no screens. And there was no plumbing. If students needed to use what you would think would be the facilities, they went out into the rice fields because there simply was no other option. So this was in 2009. I stayed in touch with the director of the school after I visited on that occasion. And personally, both myself and my mother, we would like send $100 at Christmas or something like that and ask them to buy something special for the children or buy some books that they could use or things like that. But there was no sort of formal program at that time. But in 2014, I went back to the school. Now, these are all pictures of the students from 2009. And you can see, if you look at the students, like, things are pretty sparse. Things are pretty plain for them. The children are thin. The school itself is pretty sparse. Now, statistically, you can see on this slide, 46% of the children in Bihar are malnourished. That rate has actually gone up a little bit in the last 2 years during the pandemic, unfortunately. But I want you to just kind of hold in mind these pictures as I move forward and show you some pictures from more recent years when things have improved at the school. I'm just going to show you, there are two schools that we work at. The other school is called Bhavishami, and Bhavishami is a slightly bigger school. And this is actually outside of the school. We were doing a circle activity. I think actually we ended up doing the hokey pokey. But whenever I bring students or travelers to India, we always visit both schools. The Bhavishami school is a bigger school, and it's in a more remote area. It's 10 kilometers into the countryside. It serves almost exclusively children from the lowest caste. Officially, the caste system was outlawed in India many years ago, but many people still recognize caste differences and treat people at the lower end of the spectrum with a lot of challenging behaviors. And so it's very difficult for people from that lower caste to have the same opportunities as other people. And even the public schools don't provide as much education in this area. So this school is a newer school, and the kids there are really still at the very beginning of getting to have more opportunities. But I'll tell you more about that as we move forward. So whenever I do bring a group to India, I think it's really important, as I said, to give an opportunity for people to connect and interact with the local population and the local kids. You can see this picture was from the last time I went to Bodhgaya, which I believe this was in 2018. This young woman was a college student, and she's an early education major. And as you might be able to guess, looking at her right there, she was actually leading the I'm a Little Teapot song. But another thing that I'd like you to look at is just the fact that if you look at this picture compared to a couple slides back, most of the students have uniforms. And as you'll see, as I show you more of the pictures, the kids really are looking better. Well, what happened in the school between 2014 and 2021 was that I helped to start a lunch program. The director of the school, I was visiting, well, actually, I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. I'll get back to that. So this is another school group at this, another group that was visiting the school with me. One of the people that visited the school with me was an artist. She did some murals in the school. I try to bring in whatever people's gifts are that are coming on my programs. We try to share those with the students. So whether that's a game with the children, art with the children, some kind of interactive sports activities, there are all different ways that you can connect, and many of them you don't need language for, which is important because while some of the students speak English, many of them do not. And it is possible to connect in pretty meaningful ways interacting with children without a whole lot of language if you have things like art or movement-based activities to connect around. And my groups have always found that a really meaningful way to connect. So a couple more statistics about Bihar before I give you the story of how I came to start a meal program, which honestly was never my intention. So the state of Bihar has a per capita income, average income of $610 a year. The average income in India is $2,200 a year. So it's about less than a third of the average income for the country, which is already pretty modest by many global standards. In 2019, 30%, a little more than 30% of the state's population was living below the poverty line. If you look at 2021, that number has increased, and this is due almost entirely to the pandemic. So at this point, we're almost up to 34% of the population in Bihar is living below the poverty line, and more than 52% are suffering multidimensional poverty, meaning they have more than one factor, not just financial deprivation, but perhaps nutritional deprivation, inadequate housing, inadequate education, inability to meet basic needs in more than one area. Another challenge that's faced by the people of Bihar is that of all the states in India, and I believe that number was 26 different provinces or states, they have the lowest literacy rates. Almost 65% of the people in India who are over 15 are not able to read at a proficient level. So with those pieces of background in mind, I started an organization with a couple of colleagues who came to India with me. And as Kristen mentioned, we call that the Bihar Educational Change Foundation, or B-Change for short. Just to look at our logo for a minute here, it's a child jumping or frolicking with a book. And this behind the child is a Bodhi leaf. The Bodhi tree that the Buddha was enlightened under has sort of a teardrop shape. And so this is symbolic of the school is located in Bodhgaya, it serves children, and part of what we do is provide for their health as well as their education. So I'm going to give you a little bit more information about the story of how this started. So in 2014, I ended up visiting the school in a period of September into October. I went as a volunteer, as a teacher and a teacher trainer. And while I was there, at that time, there were about 35 to 40 students in the school that were attending every day, and about 6 of the students were living there. They call the school Prema Orphans Trust. And some of the students live at the school because they do not have a stable place to live at home. Now, at this time in 2014, there was no dorm housing for the students. This space that the students are sitting on, that was where they slept at night. Now, by this time, by 2014, there was a toilet indoors. They did have a light, but the school was still not very prosperous. And it still actually is not very prosperous. It's still a very modest school. But during this time, the 6 children that were at the school who were living there as orphans, at lunchtime, they would be fed lunch. One of the teachers would make usually dal and rice and perhaps a veg curry. And the 6 students that were living at the school would get fed. And then about 5 or 6 students would walk home to the village, and their moms or dads would feed them lunch. And then about 20 or 25 children would go outside and play with balls or play with sticks or play different games like hopscotch, but they didn't eat lunch at all. And so I asked the director, as I was eating lunch with the 6 children inside, the director came in and we were talking, and I said, "Hey, how come all those kids are outside playing games and they're not taking a break to have some lunch?" And he said, "Well, not all of the kids get lunch." He said, "We can't afford to feed everyone lunch, and not all of the families can give their kids a meal in the middle of the day. So the kids that aren't able to get lunch at home, if they don't live in the school, then they just play at lunchtime." Well, as you can imagine, this made me feel pretty terrible. And the following day, I stopped eating lunch with the children and went out and played balls and games with them while I was thinking about how I was going to raise money so these kids could eat lunch instead. And I have to say, being a perhaps rather soft American, although that's not usually how I think of myself, by the end of the day, when I hadn't had anything to eat since my fully acceptable breakfast, that I had before the school day started, by the time school ended at 2 or 3 o'clock, I was feeling really lightheaded. I was feeling absolutely ravenous. And I just could only imagine what it was like for the kids who probably started off the day with a much less substantial breakfast than I had before we got to school. So I started a program at that time this was the same year that I was there, 2014. This woman was visiting from Brazil, and it was her birthday, and she bought popsicles for everyone. So you can look at this, was that you could call this the before picture, before the lunch program was started at this school. You can see most of the kids don't have shoes. We actually did another project to get shoes for the kids. But what happened was I went home after 6 weeks in Bihar, and I basically started bothering all my friends. And I said, I just spent 6 weeks working with these kids, and most of them don't get to eat every day for lunch, and we need to help make sure that they get lunch. And so I set up a GoFundMe page, and my goal, I believe at that time, was $6,000, and I actually was not able to reach that. I think I reached about $3,500 or $4,000 the first year that I got in donations. So I sent that to the school, and they set up a kitchen. They bought materials, they got a stove, they got cooking supplies. And the first year of the program in 2015, the students would get lunch, I think it was 3 times a week. So they would get rice, they would get dal, and then sometimes there would be a veg curry as well that might have chickpeas or some other kind of protein in it. And you can see this is, you know, the students would come through and they ate a very hearty quantity. And whenever I've gone to visit the school and seen the kids eating the lunch, it always astonishes me, the volumes that they're able to eat. Honestly, some of these kids are 40 or 50 pounds and half my height, and they eat a pile of rice bigger than I could eat in a single sitting. But I think for many of the kids, this is their primary meal of the day. Now, thankfully, after that first year, we were able to expand the program so that it's offered. School actually meets 5.5 days a week, and the school now serves lunch 6 days a week. So all of the kids that are going to the Prema school get to have lunch every day that they go to school. And this has made a really big difference in how they feel, how they eat, and how healthy they stay. The first year that I was at the school, one of the students died shortly after I left. She got a fever. Her body was very weak, and she unfortunately passed away. She was, I think, 6 or 7 years old. Since we started the lunch program, we haven't lost any students, and these students are still malnourished. Then all of their needs are not met by a single lunch program, but certainly it helps. And so this is a project that has become very near to my heart. I did not go to India intending to start a lunch program or intending to start a nonprofit. I went there because I wanted to go and be a teacher and spend time with these students in the school. And one thing led to another. So this picture is from about 3 years ago, I believe. Oh, and I'll just show you here. These are, these two and this man over here are the teachers in the school. This man is the founder of the school, and the school was actually built, it is surrounded by rice paddies. His parents are farmers, and they gave him the land on which to build the school. This man right here was a student in the school. The school was founded in 2009. He now is one of the teachers. He's been college educated, and he came back to teach. This was the last visit in 2018, and you can see it has here Sujata. Sujata is actually a village that is beside Bodhgaya. So you can actually see the Mahabodhi Temple from the Prema Orphans Trust School. But technically it is in the neighboring village of Sujata, which also is a famous pilgrimage site, because Sujata is the site where, if you know the story of the Buddha, when he was emaciated and weak from practicing austere self-deprivation tactics, and he was so weak that he almost died, a young woman named Sujata came up and offered him rice porridge. And he decided it was time to go back to a moderate life, accepting some of the conveniences of the world in order to be strong so that he could help others. So he accepted the rice pudding from Sujata, wandered a mile or so away to where the Bodhi tree is, and then became enlightened shortly after that. But Sujata itself, the village where the school is also a sacred site. And there are several sacred sites, including a stupa, which is believed to be built at the site where the Buddha was offered the rice pudding by the Buddha. Oh, sorry, by the village girl. So these are just more pictures from the outside of the school. A few more photos of the students. And So you can see over the years, rather than having a single platform that the students sleep on, at this point they have simple, but they do have desks and benches. Also, if you go up these steps onto the roof, they have built a room which actually is a dormitory that has simple bunk beds. At this point, there are 8 students that are living in the school that they call the Orphans. And the 8 students that are living in the school now actually do have a designated sleeping space, which is, as you can imagine, a blessing for them to have a little bit of a private space that's something like a home, as opposed to just sleeping on the platform where they had their classes during the day. Now, unfortunately, the last couple of years, the pandemic has been very, very hard on the people of Bihar. They had a very serious impact from COVID, particularly when Delta hit. They had very high mortality rates, and they had very serious lockdowns. The schools were both locked for about a year and a half. The schools were locked down and were not able to function. Now, the students that were orphans were still staying at the Prema school, but the other students were at home, and many of their families were not able to go out to work. Many of the businesses that sold items were locked down. It was very, very difficult for the people in this area who were barely getting by before the pandemic to get by with almost no source of income. And during that time, unfortunately, the rate of malnutrition increased. It's nearly 50% of children under the age of 5 in the last couple of years have had stunted growth because of malnutrition. This is really a very profound and serious problem. And it was honestly tormenting me to be here in the US, knowing that I had access to food and these students weren't. And so we ended up asking the teachers in both of the schools to make some appeals to the Bihar government. They actually got permission to do dry goods food distribution. So while the students were not allowed to come and have class, and they were not allowed to come and have a hot meal, which we provide during happier times and healthier times, what happened during the pandemic is we had them put together food packets. So they had dry rice, dry lentils, other supplies, and then they could bring that home and their families could cook those at home. So that was a way that we were able to provide some support during those difficult times. We also provided educational supplies as well. So just a couple more slides, and then I'm going to give Sonal a time to demonstrate how to make dal, which is actually the staple food that the students eat at the school. The second school that I mentioned that we sponsor is called Bhavisha Me. It's 10 kilometers from Prema. This is a slightly bigger school. It has almost 100 students. Part of the classes actually meet on the roof. You can see, whereas the other school had plaster walls and painted murals, Bhavisha Me hasn't got to that yet. Bhavisha Me is building a toilet, but it's not finished yet. So they're still really on the earlier side of developing their program. This school we have supported primarily with academic sustenance, meaning we help to fund teacher salaries. We have bought sewing machines so that the vocational program for teen girls is able to teach girls how to sew as well as to read. And we also have funded some special events at the school, and we did fund some pandemic-related food programs. But so far, we have not been able to fund. It would cost about $8,000 to fund a full program every day of the week at this second school. And we haven't been able to raise enough to fund the lunch program at the first school and at the second school. So we're hoping that that's going to happen next year. So this is just showing some more pictures from Bhavisha Me. These were some of the food distribution packets, some of the students who are taking classes up on the roof, some of the girls. Actually, when the pandemic was beginning to recede and they realized, well, we think we're going to be able to send you back to school, the girls that had been doing the sewing program came in and sewed a bunch of masks. And that was actually a blessing, because then when they were able to reopen, there was a period where they were all required to wear masks. At this point, the numbers have gotten better and they aren't all masking as intentionally. But initially, the masks that the students were able to wear were sewn by the students who were in their seamstress program. So this is sort of my last slide before we go into the final one. And this is just sort of a fun, very up-to-the-date moment picture. This is one particular student from Prema. This boy, Nitesh, in 2014, was one of the students at the school when I was volunteering and teaching for 6 weeks. He was one of the older students in the school. I think he was about 12 at that time. And he was very sweet, and his English was pretty good, but he was a little boy. Well, now he's all grown up. He graduated from high school. He's taking college classes. And 2 days ago, or maybe 3 days ago now, he flew to New Delhi to take teacher certification classes. He's hoping to come back and be a teacher at the school. So the jury is still out. We don't know if he passed his test yet or not, but his cousin, who is a teacher in the school, followed the same path. He was a student. He was one of the orphans who lived and was raised in the school. And now he is coming back and is hoping he will be able to be a teacher there, perhaps by the end of this year. So he's sort of one of the success stories of the school, taking students from these very, very impoverished living environments, giving them an opportunity through food and education to have their life improve and to have more opportunities. So you're absolutely under no obligation to do anything about this information, but should you feel interested in supporting the programs of Be Change, Kristen did say it was all right for me to share the website and a little bit of information about that. As I said, our programs at Be Change fund two primary schools, and it includes a meal program at the Prema School, teacher salaries, and special programs, as well as educational supplies. Now, we have, for this year, we did actually meet our goals to fund our basic programs, meaning the meal program at the school, the Prema School, teacher salaries, and special programs. But it is our hope that what I would like to do, my goal for the end of the year, is that I asked the teacher at Bhavishami if we were to start a school program at his school, kind of like we did at the other school, where we first build the kitchen and maybe started offering 2 or 3 meals a week, and then we can work up to it with fundraising so that in a year or maybe 2, we could offer programs that would provide meals every day. What would that cost? And he said that it would cost $2,000 to build a kitchen, which basically is a brick addition to the school, to build a stove, to put a stove in there, to buy all the cooking equipment, the gas cartridges, and to get it set up with enough food to begin feeding the children some initial meals. So since I started this additional project, which is $2,000, we've raised a little over $1,100. My birthday was earlier this month, and I had a number of friends. I said, please don't give me a present. Help build the kitchen for the Bhavishami school. And we have about $1,100. So at this point, if we get $900 more, we will build a kitchen at the school, hopefully in January. So if you're interested in doing that, Kristen can share the links with you later. You also can just look up bechange.org, and you will find more information about our programs. I will be happy to answer questions about the school. I'd be happy to answer questions about going on pilgrimage, about Buddhist sites, anything that you would like to know about this region. It's a place that's very close to my heart. I haven't been able to go in several years because of the pandemic, but my hope is that I will be leading trips to Bodhgaya in the future. And should you have an interest in visiting, either to learn about religious sites or to work with children, or ideally both, I'd be happy to share my contact information with you and to let you know if you might like to do that in the future. When I've led the programs to India the last 5 years, actually I've also led programs to Nepal, I lead the programs and charge a little bit more than the actual cost of the trip, and 100% of the extra proceeds go to fund the meal program and the educational programs at the school. So that's the nature of the programs that I'm running these days. As Kristen said, I'm a state representative now. So for about half of the year, I'm in session in the Vermont legislature. But at other points, my schedule is more flexible. And so when the pandemic is ended, I look forward to being able to bring people back to see India and to see the school. So sorry, I ran a little bit over. I did not see my clock when I was giving my talk, and I took more than my designated time, but it's all yours.
It was very, very important information, very informative, Michelle. And this was probably the first type of destination series of this kind. And I think that it was really important for us to share that, as we're thinking about touring the world and going different places for our own enjoyment, we also have to think about what that impact is on the local communities. And so I think that it's really incredible to share opportunities for folks to engage in seeing parts of the world, but also do good work while they are there. So thank you so much for sharing that. We are running out of time, but I absolutely want to get to Sonal because she has prepared a nice demo for us in terms of making dal. I know that Michelle mentioned that rice is a big staple, but also dal is a big staple across India. And so this is something that I'm really excited to learn how to make so I can do this at home as well. So Sonal, I'm going to try to add you. Where are you? Let's see. I think she's getting.
So I'm going to switch over to Tristan's headphones real quick.
Okay, I'm trying to find him to spotlight. There we go. I'm going to spotlight. I'm going to try. I think I have to make a co-host first. I think it's because the camera's off that I can't spotlight it. So once you're ready, there we go. There we go.
Okay, can you see me?
Okay, great. There we are in the kitchen. Wonderful.
We're in my kitchen. Michelle, thank you so much for being here today. Michelle has been a colleague and a great friend of mine for many, many years. And it was just incredible to hear all the work you're doing in India. And I don't know if you saw the comment yet, but my dad was texting me and he was so inspired by everything you're doing and actually donated to your fund. So I hope that you do reach your goal next year for getting that kitchen in the school. With that, I would just love to do a quick demo of dal, just keeping in mind that it can look different in every single household, depending on the items you have, how much money you have, and where you're living. But this is the recipe that I was taught by my mother. My dad is going to try to take credit for it. It was not my dad, it was my mom that taught me this, but he's on the line right now. But to start, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to soak some lentils overnight, whether it's black, yellow, green. I have a little container here of the different kinds of lentils that I use. And soaking it actually helps cook it a lot faster. If you don't soak your lentils, it can take up to 7 hours to cook. So I usually soak them overnight. That takes about 4 hours to cook. And then you just want to add water into a crock pot or the stove or a pressure cooker, whatever you have at home. I actually use a rice cooker for it. And you add water. You want a ton of water because it's going to boil and the lentils are going to be soaked with water. So you have to keep checking on it and adding water as you're cooking. And then over here, I have an array of everything that you're going to put in it. So we'll start with a little bit of ghee. This is the hardest part about cooking Indian food is there's no measurements for anything. It's kind of just you watch other people cook and then you learn how to cook it. So I put about 2 spoons of ghee, just enough for it to float over in the top. And then my favorite masala that I use is a Shan brand. You can get it at any Indian store, very, very cheap. And actually on the back of the box tells you exactly how to make it really simply. I complicate things because that's how my mom cooks. But you're just gonna wanna sprinkle a little bit of this into the pot. Again, really hard, no recipes. I would say maybe 2 spoonfuls of it. And then with that, I put a little bit of turmeric. I put a little bit of garam masala. It's a mix of spices, comes already mixed. You can buy it at an Indian store. Mustard seeds. And then paprika. And then you want a little bit of garlic. Just a spoonful. You could do fresh, usually tastes better, but it's easier for me to just buy a bottle and use that. Salt, this is kind of the hard part. It's kind of just salt to taste. So start with a little bit, and then as it cooks, you can try it and see if you need more. Of course, pepper. And then some cumin. And then you want to put all your fun veggies. So I have my tray of everything already cut, kind of put over here. So this is cilantro and parsley. Put a little bit of that in here. I'm gonna put some tomatoes, potatoes. These are curry leaves. So these are actually dry, but you can the store. Just push all that in there. Some some ginger, fresh ginger. This is tamarind. It's really uncommon to cook with tamarind, but it gives it a little bit of kind of a sour taste with all the spices. It helps kind of dilute the spices so it's not too spicy. I add carrots, dill, some onions, and then some jalapenos. And then I like to squeeze lemon. So if you ever have food that's a little too spicy, lemon or lime will help kind of take the spice out. I add a little bit of lemon. And then this is some homemade pickled fruit that my mom made. It's made with fresh limes and it has a ton of spices in it. Dry the limes and then add some spices. And I actually add a little bit of that. That's kind of my secret little touch because it tastes like my mom. So I'll add that in there. And then you just want to mix everything up in here. Make sure you have enough water. I always have extra water just in case it starts to boil and soak in. You can never have too much water in there. And then you just let it cook. So if you want to come look at it up close, everything is kind of just soaking up there. You can mix it around a little bit. See the potatoes, the lentils are kind of hidden at the bottom, but that will take about 3 to 4 hours to cook. And then when you're done with it, we're going to move over to the stove really quickly. And I won't actually do it, but I'll just tell you what you want to do. So in the stove, you want to put a little bit of ghee, which is right here, a little bit of ghee, a little bit of garlic, a little bit of ginger, onions, tomatoes, curry leaves, almost everything that apart from the spices. You want to brown it on the stove, and then right before you serve your food, you want to put it in the pot. It just gives it a little bit of a cooked taste. It gives it a little bit of just a different taste. I don't know. My mom never explained it to me, but so I can't explain it to you, but it's just kind of what you do. And then you can eat it with rice, roti, or naan, or you can eat it as a soup. So that is my demo, kind of my easy demo. But if you have different recipes or if you've eaten it a different way, I'd love to hear how you cook your lentils. So
that is going to be delicious, Sonal.